Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a piece of history that, honestly, still completely captures our collective imagination well over a century later. We are going to look closely at the source material detailing the catastrophic maiden voyage of the RMS Titanic. Think about it. How does a marvel of modern human engineering, a ship literally built to defy nature, become the site of such a massive, heartbreaking tragedy? Well, we're going to break down the timeline, the mechanics, and the incredibly frustrating human errors that led to this disaster.
It really is the ultimate question, isn't it? How on earth did the world's largest, most luxurious, and supposedly unsinkable ship just vanish beneath the freezing Atlantic on its very first trip? We're going to explore the dramatic irony and the cascading series of human errors that turned this incredible vessel, which was carrying over 2,000 souls, into a frozen grave. As you'll see in the source material, it wasn't just one single thing that brought the Titanic down. It was a domino effect of blinding hubris, immense pressure, and a few remarkably tiny mistakes.
To really wrap our heads around the scale of this loss, we first got to understand the sheer scale of the ambition behind it. Built in Belfast over 3 intense years by an army of 3,000 workers, the Titanic cost $7.5 million to construct. To put that into perspective for us today, that is over $400 million. The ship was 269 meters long and stood as tall as a 10-story building. It was the absolute pinnacle of maritime scale and ambition, drawing massive crowds of over 100,000 people just to watch it leave the dock.
Section 1. Hubris and Fatal Flaws. The socioeconomic divide on this ship was just staggering. Just look at these ticket prices. A third-class ticket was £7, and second class was $13. But a first-class parlor suite, try an astronomical £870. In today's money, that's equivalent to over $100,000 for one trip. This sheer financial investment completely blinded the operators. It forced them to focus almost entirely on catering to the ultra-rich, which dangerously distracted them from essential, basic safety protocols.
You know, the ship was famously dubbed Unsinkable by its creators, the White Star Line. And looking at the specs, you can kind of see why they believed that. It had this double-bottom hull designed to protect against underwater impacts. But more importantly, the lower decks were divided into 16 watertight compartments. The engineering was so specific that even if 4 of those compartments completely flooded, the ship would theoretically remain afloat. And that right there gave everyone on board a totally false sense of absolute invincibility. But here's the thing about massive disasters. They almost never start with a massive failure. They usually start with something ridiculously small. The Swiss cheese model of failure started right here. An officer named David Blair was transferred off the Titanic right before it sailed. In the rush of leaving, he accidentally took a small key in his pocket. Just a tiny key. But that key opened the specific locker containing the binoculars for the crow's nest. Because of that one single oversight, lookouts Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee were left visually impaired. They were forced to scan a freezing, pitch-black ocean with nothing but their naked eyes. Section 2. The ignored warnings. By April 14th, the risks were just piling up. It was a dark, moonless night with bone-chilling winds that literally made the lookout's eyes water. Yet, despite these conditions, White Star Line chairman Bruce Ismay, who was actually a passenger on board, was aggressively pressuring Captain Edward Smith to maintain a reckless speed of 23 to 24 knots. Why? He wanted to arrive in New York ahead of schedule to create a giant media sensation. Because of that pressure, even though the ship received 7 distinct ice warnings that very day, they never bothered to slow down. This fatal hubris really peaked at 10:55 p.m. The Titanic received a final, desperate warning from a nearby ship, the SS Californian. They explicitly stated they were surrounded by ice and stopping for the night. But the Titanic's exhausted radio operator, Jack Phillips, was totally overwhelmed prioritizing passenger telegrams for the wealthy elites. He actually snapped at the Californian's operator, telling him to shut up and get off the line, completely ignoring a critical, life-saving warning. Which brings us to Section 3, the fatal collision. The pacing accelerates incredibly fast on the night of April 14th. Finally, at 11:39 p.m., lookout Frederick Fleet spots it, a massive 400-foot iceberg, roughly the size of a football field, sitting dead ahead in the dark. He frantically rings the bell 3 times and calls the bridge. First Officer William Murdoch immediately orders the engines reverse and the ship turned hard to the left. But with their incredible speed and a ship that unimaginably massive, it was just too late. Exactly 1 minute later, at 11:40 p.m., the Titanic suffers a devastating side impact collision. Now, because that impact happened on the side of the ship, it completely bypassed that protective double bottom we talked about earlier. The ice literally sliced open the ship's side, rupturing 6 watertight compartments immediately. And remember, the ship was only designed to survive 4. Ship designer Thomas Andrews quickly assessed the horrific damage down below and had to deliver the terrifying news to Captain Smith. They had maybe 1 to 2 hours left before the unsinkable ship was gone forever.
Section 4. The final hours.
The sheer volume of water rushing in was just impossible to fight. Within barely 45 minutes of the collision, 13,500 long tons of freezing ocean water violently flooded into the ship. The crew desperately fired up the bilge pumps, but those pumps were only designed to clear 1,700 tons per hour. The math was brutally against them. The water was pouring in exponentially faster than it could ever be pumped out. And here is where the absolute heartbreak of the Titanic's hubris is laid bare. The lifeboat math. There were over 2,200 people on board. However, because the operators so firmly believed the ship was unsinkable, they only equipped it with 20 lifeboats. Those boats had a maximum combined capacity of just about 1,200 people, meaning that even if every single boat was loaded flawlessly, over 1,000 people were mathematically doomed to stay on that sinking ship.
As you can imagine, panic completely sets in. At midnight, distress signals go up. By 12:45 a.m., the first lifeboat is launched. But thanks to poor communication and sheer chaos, a boat designed to hold 65 people is lowered with only 27 inside. By 2 a.m., the very last lifeboat leaves, stranding 1,500 people. The immense, compounding weight of the water pulls the front of the ship deep down, raising the back high into the night sky. The pressure gets so intense that the mighty ship actually snaps in half. And at 2:20 a.m., the Titanic slips beneath the freezing Atlantic, dumping those stranded into -2-degree water, where survival was measured in just mere minutes.
Finally, Section 5. Rescue and accountability. The contrast between the two closest ships is honestly one of the most frustrating parts of this source material. You've got the SS Californian sitting a mere 37 kilometers away. They were literally close enough to see the Titanic's distress flares light up the sky. But their captain dismissed the flares and their radio was turned off for the night, so they never heard the cries for help. Meanwhile, the RMS Carpathia, which was 107 kilometers away, immediately rushed to the scene the second they heard the signal. But they were just too far. They didn't arrive until 3:30 a.m., rescuing the 706 traumatized people who made it onto the lifeboats. The aftermath led to massive U.S. and British inquiries that interrogated over 100 survivors. The investigations laid it all out, exposing the fatal combination of Chairman Ismay's pressure for speed, the blatantly ignored warnings, the negligent actions of the Californian's captain, and, of course, the severe lack of lifeboats. These tragic findings forever changed global maritime law. Yet, despite all the investigations, the physical wreck of the Titanic lay completely lost in the black depths of the Atlantic for over 70 years. Since that wreck sat hidden in the dark for decades, its story really forces us to ask, how did the ultimate symbol of human engineering fall victim to blinding hubris and a single block of ice? Looking at how something as small as a misplaced key and a desire for good press brought down a marvel of the modern world, it makes you wonder, what other unsinkable systems in our world today might be hiding their very own fatal flaws?